This is the Federal Mobility Policy Update with DARRYL from the Natural Resources Defense Council, Beth Osborne from Transportation for America, Martha ROSKOWSKI from the Funder Collaborative for Mobility and Access, and DARRYL Young from the Summit Foundation. This week, with all the negotiations going on around infrastructure, what does it mean for biking, walking, transit, and electric vehicles? Is the negotiations actually helping transportation or hurting transportation? And what does it mean for climate? All that and more on this week's edition of the Federal Mobility Policy Update. Welcome to another edition of the Federal Mobility Policy Update. We've got so much to cover this week, and for the last couple of weeks, as you know, an infrastructure package that affects transportation is moving through. With us, we've got an esteemed panel. We have DARRYL LOVAAS from the Natural Resources Defense Council. Hi, Darren. We've got Beth Osborne from Transportation for America. Hi, Beth.
Hello.
And we've got my colleague, Martha ROSKOWSKI, who is with the Funder Collaborative for Mobility and Access. So let's get started as we normally do and talk about the three quick hits, things that you need to know about what's been transpiring on the Hill around the infrastructure package and transportation. Let's start with Beth. Beth, what are you hearing?
Yeah, we've got a ton going on legislatively. We hear a lot that not much happens in DC, but a ton is happening every day here right now. The House has passed a complete transportation reauthorization bill, which funds our transit and highways and rail. The Senate has passed a partial bill, which includes highways, rail, and safety, but not transit, which still needs to be worked out. And there's a bipartisan negotiation process going on to figure out how to include a lot of parts of the American Jobs Plan proposed by the White House in that negotiation. The second thing is these negotiations seem to be more focused on bipartisanship than substance. I think that is more true on the Democratic side, that, the deal seems to be the point, not what we get from the deal. And the last thing is we do have time to have an impact on this process and point out when their dealing results in too much damage to be worth doing anything at all.
Great. Darren, what are you hearing? What are the things we need to know?
Yeah, so my three things, especially over the past week, are one, this narrowly failed vote on the floor of the Senate yesterday regarding moving to debate about the bipartisan infrastructure framework. It failed 49-51, including Majority Leader Schumer voting against it, therefore reserving the right to bring it up later. And that's what everyone is wondering. When is this going to come up? Everyone's talking about next week. The deal making still goes on. And as Beth says, it really is focusing on bipartisanship as much as substance, which is unsettling. Secondly, this past week has seen the return of the House in terms of relevance on the shoulders mostly of Chairman DeFazio of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, who has been increasingly vocal about the fact that he and the bill his committee spent so long writing needs to be part of the debate. He's rallied members of this committee, which I think is still the largest in the House, and other progressives are also rallying to this cause. So the House seems newly relevant to this week. And then the last thing is everyone is wondering, okay, whatever happens with this bipartisan deal, what about the next thing, which is this big multi-trillion-dollar reconciliation package that only needs Democratic support in the Senate? What does that look like? What's going to be in there? And how is that going to relate to this framework?
That's great. Martha, what are you seeing as things that people need to know on the outside?
We're just seeing a lot of crazy stuff happening. And a little later in this show, we'll get Darren and Beth to dive deep into kind of a few bits of the crazy, just so you can follow along with the clown car, the circus.
It's not a clown car. It's a crazy. It's a crazy. Sorry. It's crazy. It's not a clown car. We're not clowns.
No, it's a three-ring circus. And
okay,
part of it, we got
circus.
elephants,
okay.
We got donkeys, we got clown cars driving around. We got the whole thing.
Send your cars and letters to Martha ROSKOWSKI at the Mobility and Access Collaborative. Let's turn into what is actually happening and unpack what we've just heard. Let's start with you, Beth. What is actually, things are moving fast. It feels like they moved fast and then they stalled out, as Aaron said. What do funders and activists need to know outside the Beltway?
Well, they're moving fast and they're not. I mean, there's a lot of conversation and there's a drive for a vote next week. But whether or not they can get there, whether they can come to agreement, whether that not this gets derailed, there's plenty of opportunities to slow this down. I think Darren brought up a really good point about the vote yesterday. The reason the Republicans voted against it was there was no bill. There's nothing written down. To pass a bill, you need a piece of paper with words on it. And they didn't have it because there was no agreement yet. Now, Leader Schumer has said that as a result of forcing the vote, he's got a date certain that he can bring something up. Does he? I don't know. I mean, there's a full intention to bring something up next week. But again, if they can't get to agreement, they can't get to agreement. It's not like they haven't had time. They just don't agree. And it's really interesting to see what we thought was agreed to items being reopened. We're seeing the transit funding come up again. There's a lot of conversation about whether or not we're going to be able to hold to the 80-20 split, 80% for highways, 20% for transit, which has been sacrosanct since the early 80s in required spending. And we don't know. I mean, the chairman of the committee with jurisdiction over transit says that he's been having to fight really hard. Well, can we get to agreement? Unclear. On the funding for electrification, the line item says electrification, but now they're arguing that 50% of it should go to natural gas and propane. So if the outline, it can't be stuck to. If everything's open, there's infinite things that can come up. But the goal is to have a vote in the Senate next week. So we'll see if they can actually make it.
How much of this is a function of the Senate driving the agenda? I know, Darren, you were talking earlier before we started the show around how, Congressmember DeFazio is starting to say, hey, the House has an equally important role. Why don't you cover that question and then cover what else you see happening in the House and elsewhere on the Hill?
Yeah, so again, Chairman DeFazio, I think, stunned everyone at the beginning of the week by announcing it would be better if there were no bipartisan deal. And honestly, he's probably gotten ahead of leadership in the House. And it's understandable. I think any chairman of his committee would have done this. They spend a long time working on what I think is arguably the best transportation bill ever. And it's been sidelined in this debate among 22, this gang of 22 bipartisan senators and jurisdictions with committee over the surface authorization bill in the Senate. So the House is mobilizing, and hopefully this is having an effect in the room where it happens, so to speak, right? Because what really matters is, okay, are those provisions now part of the negotiations? Are they being taken seriously? And could we see them in whatever deal gets announced, if it gets announced? Because as Beth points out, the maddening thing about all this is we've seen no paper yet, so we don't know what has been agreed to. We just keep putting together a picture based on scattered information we got.
Well, and what is included is a big question. So remember, the House bill is 1,200 pages long. It's not like they're just working out a couple of details if they're going to put this whole thing together. There's a lot to work out. And while they've been working from the Senate bill doesn't include a transit title. And there are other issues in the House bill like cybersecurity and transportation that aren't addressed in the Senate bill at all. So by boxing the House out, they create an added problem for themselves that I don't think they're thinking through, because they're so focused on the deal and the money, they're not thinking about the substance. And in the bipartisan deal, my fear, and I hear it repeatedly, is there's a notion that it's worth doing some damage to do some good. The thing is, in transportation, we do 4 times more damage than good. And that deal seems okay to the administration and Capitol Hill, who are saying, but it's a record amount of spending in transit. So ignore the highway title, ignore the fact that it won't go to repair, it won't go to safety, it won't go to climate on the highway side. tolerate 4 times more status quo highway spending that has created our equity, climate, public safety, public health problems, and just be happy that you're getting a little more transit dollars. And so I think that Chairman DeFazio's question is a fair one. At what point is it better to have no deal?
And so much of this, quote, deal is emanating, if I'm right, from the Senate, who passed legislation or passed a measure out to the larger Senate regarding not requiring states to measure the climate impact of their highway decisions. So we keep hearing everyone say no climate, no deal. We hear members of the very committee that voted for that saying that, and yet is there any evidence that that's still in the package at this point?
What is climate?
Right.
I mean, I think that's the issue. In the Senate, they've produced, and Darren, I don't know if I've got the numbers right. I think it was about an $8 billion program for climate. And right. I think it was $9 billion for resilience. I don't remember for sure. I might be flipping those. And the thing is, most states can opt out of the climate program, but they seem really proud. And I've actually heard senators say who voted on that bill, hey, we put twice as much money in for climate as compared to the House. Well, you have a program with the term carbon in the title and a bigger number, but you also have an exemption to the program that you could drive a truck through. And the rest of your program is not bringing climate into the consideration at all. In the House, they have a dedicated program, a little over $3 billion a year for climate, but they've oriented more of the overall program towards climate too, including setting a greenhouse gas emissions performance measure. So, I don't think they know what it means to have climate in the bill, or maybe they know, but their definition of it and our definition might be different.
Yeah.
So let me just switch gears a little bit here. Let's name names. So on the Senate side, like who's driving this? I won't call it a clown car. I'll say who's driving this bus these days?
Off a cliff.
I have learned that there are subcommittees that are working on different issues, and on transit, it's being led by Senators Tester and Collins with input from Senators Tillis, Warner, Moran, and Hassan. What's interesting is there's really only one member of this that has substantial transit. That's Warner. Though I'd say Senator Tillis in North Carolina has a handful of medium-sized transit systems. So those are the people who seem to have the most control on transit, and those who have relationships there, those are who to focus on.
Yeah, I agree with that, although a complicating wrinkle here, and I think this is a complicating wrinkle with this whole process, is the vehicle carrying this deal is the Surface Transportation Reauthorization, which means Chairman Brown of the Banking Committee and Ranking Member Toomey of the Banking Committee also have a say. And in fact, it seems pretty clear that Senator Toomey of Pennsylvania is a roadblock. And it is one of the biggest challenges in putting together a transit portion of this with substantial investment in transit.
Well, and Darren, can we just take a second to talk about how out of the blue Toomey's aggressive opposition to transit is?
Yeah, that's the crazy thing that I've observed with all of this is the Banking Committee, which has jurisdiction over several issues, including public transportation, has a history of the chairman and the ranking member supporting investments in transit. It's their turf, right? It's their responsibility. That's not the case this time around with the ranking member. Senator Toomey's in his last term, and for some reason he's decided he's going to take an ideologically rigid stance against transit investment. And it's something that they need to overcome. Again, he's become a roadblock. Yeah.
Well, and then there's this call again for bipartisanship, and they hold it against transit that there's no bipartisan agreement, but how do you come to a bipartisan agreement with a transit opponent?
Yeah, and that's the backdrop in the Senate is, bipartisanship as a first principle, right? Which, when you're making policy, may not be the best course of action. So that's a lot of what we're running into, and it's not just transit where they're having trouble. We hear another subset of the Gang of 22 is having trouble negotiating funding for electrification of school buses, provisions affecting environmental reviews pursuant to the National Environmental Policy Act, whether or not we should replace all lead pipes in water systems, or just some of them. I mean,
there's
basic
a few
issues.
million people who can handle lead pipes, right? That's a bipartisan agreement.
So this is those are cases in which maybe bipartisanship should not be the first principle, right? When deciding policy.
Well, and within climate, within the electrification issue, they're talking about 50% of the money agreed to for electrifying the fleet going to natural gas pipelines and propane. So, there's some big things here. And again, what it means to have climate in the bill, if it means creating, thousands of new natural gas stations, which there's no demand for and will not be utilized, but it will drain money from electrifying and making it easier for consumers to purchase and choose electric vehicles. How climate heavy can this thing be? So it's an interesting dynamic in the Senate. And I think if they brought the House into the conversation, we might see more even push and pull between the Senate Republicans and the House Democrats. But the Senate Democrats, what they consider negotiation and seeking a deal is, I don't think it's what anybody on the outside would assume is doing that.
So thanks for that, Beth. That's a lot to unpack, isn't it? But let's talk briefly about what can people do, right? We can't tell people to phone their member of Congress and ask them to vote for a bill. But funders and others who are watching this are, they're influential. They likely know their member of Congress. What's the message that we want to be sending at this point, at this, sort of crazy making point? Is it don't lose climate, don't lose equity out of the bills? Is it, what's the general theme that needs to be coming from folks who are looking for a more, a more progressive transportation package? So,
Beth, I'm wondering if we should point people to the sign-on letter from last week, right?
Going to suggest that, yes.
Yeah. We Transportation for America, NRDC, the Campaign for Transit Justice, and others put together a letter pretty quickly, actually, with 7 priorities from the House bill. And we got more than 130 signings in just a couple days, right? And sent it up to everyone on the Hill. I think that's a pretty good list to rally around. And
we'll put that in the show notes. We'll take so that's a good starting place to what to emphasize with anyone looking at a package. Does it meet the goals of these 7 issues? We'll put that in the show notes so people can link to it. It's a good resource.
I'd also say, Chairman DeFazio is pushing for a day of action on Tuesday. And I know that folks watching this can't necessarily call their members of Congress, but there's a push to share what matters on social media as well, or at least share information. I mean, all citizens of the United States should share basic information with those making policy. You might not be able to call and say, vote for this, but denying them information is a bad move in a representative democracy. So if there are things they need to see or facts they need to understand, it's time to send that up. On Tuesday, we'll be sharing a lot of information about what would make this a climate bill. What does it mean to act on climate and equity, and why, including those who have made great achievements towards that, like Chairman Fazio, should be a part of a conversation and should be celebrated for the good accomplishments he's made. So I think that day of action is a good one to look at.
So we'll put in the show notes, we'll put the links both to your resources as well as NRDC's resources on the larger infrastructure package. I can't emphasize enough how impressive Representative DeFazio puts representation back into being a representative, in not only representing his district, but representing everyone who rides transit, depends on a clean planet. I'm really impressed how much he's really stepped forward to be counted and to have his voice mean something.
DARRYL, can I put two things that are kind of on the horizon out there real quick?
Sure.
One is there is a notion that there will be a second budget reconciliation bill that includes the non-infrastructure side of things. And that's kind of looming out there if the bipartisan talks disappear or fall apart. I think preparing folks to think about what they put in that bigger package is a question, because I think particularly in the Senate, they would still default to all of this deal that they've given so much ground on. So we need to remind them that if they're going to go the reconciliation path, they need to think bigger. And the other big thing is on September the 30th, which is not that far away anymore, the Surface Transportation Program and all our government programs expire. So they're about to go out on recess. And when they get back in September, they're going to have to deal with all of that on top of what remains in this bipartisan infrastructure framework, or BETH, as we foolishly call it around here.
Oh, so can I add something?
Sure, please do. No,
Beth mentioned a potentially magic word, recess. And it would be great if everyone could go to town halls organized by their member of Congress, their senator, and talked about these issues. Because when, depending on how much Congress gets done by then, what happens in the August recess could make or break progress afterwards, right? So we really need to give members of Congress and senators an earful about these important priorities on infrastructure while they're home at town halls that they hold.
Okay, great. That's a lot of stuff that people can do to be engaged and be involved. So I think we're close to time. So I just want to ask, I promised we'd get to the crazy question. So we're going to do that. So Beth and Darren and DARRYL, what's one of the craziest things you've seen coming out of this process? Y'all are sort of old hands watching Congress. What's your favorite crazy bit?
I'll start.
Okay.
Every senator, every member of Congress has free transit that runs frequently, that has stops that are well protected and that are safe and are exclusive to them most of the time. That's crazy. If we're not getting transit, they shouldn't be getting transit. That's my crazy.
All right, Darren.
All right. I was going to say Toomey in his change of tune. However, the other thing that stunned me is an apparent amnesia, especially among this bipartisan gang of senators and the majority leader in the Senate, that there's a House of Representatives and they write a transportation bill too, and they need to be part of lawmaking on transportation. I'm still stunned that only in the past week does the House seem to have become relevant. Now, they've become relevant very quickly and in a big way, which is great. And I'm not sure why they weren't at the table months ago.
Yeah, and building off of that, the fact that a member of the House leadership, Representative Steny Hoyer, basically said, yeah, we'll do whatever the Senate passes. So even there's members of the House that don't seem to think the House needs to be part of the process was baffling to me. But I have to say the craziest notion to me is that we, in order to do good for climate and equity, we need to do more that will harm climate and equity, and that is considered a win. I don't understand the logic of doing, 2 steps forward on climate and 20 steps backward is a good deal.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
Okay, my crazy is that, we're seeing horrific floods in China, in Germany, in places in the United States. We have horrible wildfires in my part of the country out west, and that we're still like thinking that investing in expanding highways and putting the bulk of our money into making it easier to drive, that's even under consideration.
That's crazy. You're not crazy to think that that's crazy. That's pretty crazy. We're going to have to leave the crazy and get back to work and do the things we need to do. We're going to let our guests, DARRYL LOVAAS, be from NRDC. We want to thank him and get back to work on the Hill. And Beth Osborne from Transportation for America, get back on the Hill. If you're a funder or an advocate, get back to work. We've got a lot to do to fight the crazy and to make sense out of this. We need to stop the autonomous legislating that is happening in the Senate and let the House get back into the driver's seat, if you will. And with that, we thank you for watching. We'll be back soon with more updates. If you like this on YouTube and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.